Capitalism won, socialism lost. The Cold War ended. History reached its conclusion. This is the story you learned in school. This is also a lie. Not because capitalism failed to outlast the Soviet Union. It did outlast the Soviet Union. Not because socialist economies perform better. They did not perform better. The lie runs deeper than choosing winners and losers. The lie is the framing itself. For a century, politicians and professors presented capitalism and socialism as binary choices. You picked a side. Your nation picked a side. The world split into two camps, each convinced the other would collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Both were right. Both did collapse in their pure forms. And here's the part they left out of your textbooks. Every single major economy on Earth today operates as a hybrid system blending market mechanisms with state intervention. The United States has Social Security, federal deposit insurance, and a central bank controlling money supply. China has private property, billionaire entrepreneurs, and stock exchanges. Sweden has more billionaires per capita than the United States, alongside the highest taxes in the developed world. Pure capitalism exists nowhere. Pure socialism exists nowhere. The 20th century did not produce a winner between two systems. It produced a graveyard of ideological purity in a world of reluctant hybrids. The capitalism versus socialism debate was never about which philosophy produced more wealth. The documented record shows both systems generated massive economic growth under specific conditions. British industrial output grew 400% between 1780 and 1840. Soviet industrial output grew 400% between 1928 and 1940. Raw growth proves nothing about system superiority. The real contest centered on structural questions. Who controls the bottlenecks of economic flow? Who owns the machinery of extraction? Who sets the incentives shaping human behavior? Who becomes untouchable when the system cracks? Capitalism creates private gatekeepers. Socialism creates state gatekeepers. Both systems concentrate leverage in the hands of a few. The difference lies in which few, through what infrastructure, and with what accountability. Every economic system is a machine for answering these questions. Every crisis reveals whose answers break first. Welcome to Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. The system controlling your life right now is neither capitalism nor socialism. It is a specific hybrid mixture your nation assembled through a century of crises, compromises, and course corrections. Your taxes fund a percentage of your national economy, ranging from 25% in the United States to 55% in Denmark. Your central bank sets interest rates affecting every mortgage, car loan, and credit card in your wallet. Your government regulates which drugs you ingest, which buildings you occupy, and which securities you purchase. If you live in America, you participate in a low-tax hybrid where markets dominate, but the state intervenes during every major crisis. If you live in Scandinavia, you participate in a high-tax hybrid where generous welfare coexists with some of the freest markets on Earth. If you live in China, you participate in a state-directed hybrid where the Communist Party approves billionaires and controls capital flows. None of these systems matches the pure ideologies their founders proclaimed. All of them emerged from a 100-year experiment in which pure systems failed and hybrids survived. This is the story of the experiment: the crashes, the famines, the depressions, and the bailouts. The documented evidence of what happened when nations bet everything on ideological purity, and the reluctant convergence toward mixed systems nobody planned but everyone now inhabits. Capitalism did not emerge from economic theory. It emerged from a series of legal changes in 18th century England, allowing private individuals to own the means of production and sell goods at prices determined by supply and demand. The results were immediate and brutal. British parliamentary blue books from 1833 to 1845 document the conditions inside the new factories. Children as young as 5 worked 16-hour shifts in cotton mills. Workers lived in cellars without ventilation, sanitation, or clean water. The Manchester Board of Health recorded the average lifespan of laborers in industrial districts, 17 years. The gentry in the same city lived to 38. Capitalism generated wealth and distributed death. These were not separate outcomes. They emerged from the same structural incentive: maximize profit by minimizing labor costs. Factory owners face no legal requirement to provide safe conditions, limit working hours, or pay living wages. The pressure points of the system pushed relentlessly toward extraction. Workers without capital owned nothing but their capacity to labor. They sold this capacity at whatever price the market would bear. The market bore starvation wages. Friedrich Engels documented these conditions in his 1845 work, The Condition of the Working Class in England. He cross-referenced his observations with Manchester Board of Health reports. The data painted a picture of industrial capitalism as a machine converting human lives into profit. Workers entered healthy. Workers exited broken or dead. The machine did not care. The machine measured only output. Yet the same system produced unprecedented aggregate growth, British industrial output quadrupled in 60 years. Iron production increased from 68,000 tons in 1788 to 2,000 tons by 1850. Coal extraction rose from 10 million tons to 50 million tons over the same period. The infrastructure of modernity emerged from factories where children died of lung disease before reaching adulthood. Dean and Cole's reconstruction of British national income statistics, published in 1962 but based on contemporary records, forces an uncomfortable conclusion. Early capitalism succeeded as a wealth-generating machine and failed as a distribution machine. Real wages for British workers stagnated from 1780 to 1840 despite massive GDP growth. The gains flowed upward through the bottlenecks controlled by capital owners. This changed after 1840. Real wages began rising. Working conditions improved. Parliament passed factory acts limiting child labor and mandating safety standards. By 1914, British workers earned substantially more in real terms than their grandparents, despite population growth and urbanization. What changed? The workers organized. Trade unions formed pressure groups demanding higher wages. The Reform Acts of 1832 and 1867 expanded voting rights to working-class men. Political leverage forced economic concessions. Capitalism did not self-correct through market mechanisms. It corrected through political intervention in markets. The hybrid began here in the 19th century, when democratic pressure forced states to regulate the worst excesses of pure market logic. But the fundamental instability remained. Capitalism ran on booms and busts. Financial panics struck in 1825, 1837, 1857, 1873, and 1893. Each crisis wiped out savings, destroyed businesses, and threw workers into unemployment. The system generated extraordinary growth, punctuated by extraordinary destruction. Banks operated without deposit insurance. Workers labored without unemployment benefits. The elderly worked until they died or depended on family charity. The system engineered maximum extraction during good times and maximum suffering during bad times. This volatility created an opening. Critics began asking whether an alternative existed, whether production and distribution could be managed without private ownership, whether the state could run the economy more rationally than markets. A German philosopher living in London had answers. Karl Marx did not invent socialism. He systematized it. His 1867 work Das Kapital provided the theoretical framework for replacing private ownership with collective ownership, market pricing with central planning, and capitalist extraction with worker control. Marx predicted capitalism would collapse under its own contradictions. Workers would seize the means of production. The state would wither away. A classless society would emerge. The prediction came partially true in 1917. Russian workers and soldiers overthrew the Tsar. A revolutionary government took power. For the first time in history, a major nation attempted to build a socialist economy from scratch. The Soviet experiment produced immediate results. Between 1928 and 1940, Soviet industrial output grew 400%. The USSR transformed from an agricultural backwater into the world's second-largest industrial economy. Literacy rates rose from 30% to over 90%. Life expectancy increased from 36 years to 64 years. The socialist machine delivered rapid modernization at a speed capitalism never matched. This is the part of the story socialists remember. Here is the part they forget. The Soviet State Planning Committee, known as Gosplan, attempted to replace market prices with administrative decisions. The bureaucrats in Moscow determined how much steel to produce, how many shoes to manufacture, how much grain to harvest. They set prices by decree rather than supply and demand. This eliminated the information problem capitalism solves through price signals. When prices rise, producers know to make more. When prices fall, they make less. This feedback mechanism coordinates billions of decisions without central direction. Gosplan had no such mechanism. Planners relied on reports from factory managers who systematically falsified production numbers to meet quotas. The archives of the Russian State Archive of the Economy contain internal documents showing dramatic gaps between reported and actual output. Consumer goods shortages became endemic. Citizens stood in lines for hours to purchase bread, shoes, and toilet paper. The incentive structure had inverted. Under capitalism, producers profit by satisfying consumers. Under Soviet socialism, producers survived by satisfying bureaucrats. The bureaucrats wanted quota fulfillment. The consumers wanted products. These goals diverged fatally. The agricultural sector suffered most severely. In 1929, Stalin ordered the collectivization of farms. Peasants resisted. The state responded with forced requisitions. Internal NKVD reports document the consequences. Mass starvation across Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Russia. The Holodomor of 1932-33 killed between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians. Grain requisition orders from the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute archives show the state extracting food from starving regions to meet export quotas. The socialist machine produced growth and produced famine. These were not separate outcomes. They emerged from the same structural flaw. Eliminating price mechanisms destroyed the information needed to allocate resources efficiently. When planners could not know what citizens needed, they guessed. When they guessed wrong, citizens died. By the 1970s, the Soviet system had stagnated. CIA declassified economic intelligence reports from this period show American analysts documenting the slowdown in real time. Early Cold War assessments overestimated Soviet capabilities. By the 1970s, intelligence analysts saw clearly the system was failing. A 1982 assessment titled Soviet GNP Growth revealed real per capita growth had fallen below 1% annually. Technological innovation ground to a halt outside the military sector. Consumer goods remained scarce despite 70 years of socialist construction. Soviet citizens earned roughly one-third the income of their American counterparts and spent hours each week waiting in lines for basic necessities. Politburo meeting transcripts from the Gorbachev Foundation archives reveal the leadership understood the system was failing. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev told colleagues the USSR faced a pre-crisis situation. Internal documents show party officials discussing chronic shortages, technological backwardness, and the growing gap with Western living standards. The gatekeepers knew the system they controlled was breaking, and they lacked the tools to fix it because the tools required abandoning the principles on which their power rested. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, not from military defeat, not from external invasion. The economic machinery broke down. Citizens stopped believing the system would ever deliver the prosperity it promised. The state lost legitimacy and dissolved. The socialist experiment answered a historical question. Central planning without price mechanisms does not scale. It works for military production during wartime. It works for crash industrialization in underdeveloped economies. It does not work for the complex coordination modern consumer economies require. Pure socialism failed the test of time. But pure capitalism had already failed a different test. On October 29th, 1929, the New York Stock Exchange lost 12% of its value in a single day. Over the following 3 years, the index fell 89% from its peak. Industrial production collapsed by 47%. Unemployment rose from 3% to 25%. Banks failed across the country, wiping out $7 billion in deposits. In modern terms, depositors lost the equivalent of $140 billion. This was not a minor correction. This was capitalism breaking. Federal Reserve Board minutes from 1928 to 1933 document the policy decisions transforming a stock market crash into a global depression. The Fed raised interest rates to protect the gold standard. It refused to act as lender of last resort to failing banks. It allowed the money supply to contract by one-third. These decisions followed pure capitalist logic. Markets should clear without government interference. Bad banks should fail. Prices should fall until reaching equilibrium. The system should self-correct. The system did not self-correct. It spiraled into catastrophe. Farmers burned crops while urban families starved. Factories stood idle while workers begged for employment. Banks hoarded cash while businesses failed for lack of credit. The invisible hand of the market delivered invisible strangulation. U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Records from this period document the human cost. Unemployment held above 20% for 4 consecutive years. Wage income fell by half. Investment collapsed to near zero. The economy had entered a trap from which market mechanisms alone could not escape. Economists would later identify the problem. When everyone saves simultaneously, no one spends. When no one spends, businesses fail. When businesses fail, workers lose jobs. When workers lose jobs, they stop spending. The spiral feeds itself downward. Only external intervention breaks the cycle. The Great Depression shattered confidence in pure capitalism across the Western world. Voters demanded alternatives. Some turned to fascism. Germany and Italy promised national renewal through state direction of the economy. Some turned to communism. Membership in communist parties across Europe surged. Others sought a middle path, preserving markets while stabilizing their failures. Franklin Roosevelt won the 1932 American presidential election, promising a New Deal for the American people. Over the following decade, his administration reconstructed American capitalism into something its founders would not have recognized. The Securities Exchange Act of 1934 created federal oversight of stock markets. No more unregulated speculation, no more insider manipulation without consequence. The gatekeepers of capital would face state supervision. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935 guaranteed workers the right to organize unions. The structural imbalance between capital and labor would be partially corrected through collective bargaining rights. The Social Security Act of 1935 established government pensions for the elderly. No more working until death or depending on family charity. The state would provide a floor beneath which citizens would not fall. The Banking Act of 1933 created federal deposit insurance protecting savings up to $2,500. Bank runs became pointless when the government guaranteed deposits. The panic mechanism was disabled. Roosevelt did not abolish capitalism. He hybridized it. Markets would determine prices and allocate resources. The state would regulate markets, insure against catastrophic losses, and provide basic security to citizens. British Treasury papers from this period, held in the T175 series at the National Archives, show similar debates across the Atlantic. British policymakers abandoned the gold standard in 1931, allowing the currency to float. They adopted Keynesian principles of demand management, using government spending to stimulate employment during downturns. John Maynard Keynes provided the theoretical framework for the hybrid. He argued markets did not automatically produce full employment. Demand could fall short of supply for extended periods. Government spending could fill the gap, employing workers the private sector would not hire. The hybrid emerged not from ideological conviction, but from practical necessity. Pure capitalism generated crises so severe they threatened social order. Governments intervened because the alternative was collapse, or fascism, or communism. The hybrid preserved the market engine while adding state steering. World War II completed the transformation. States directed industrial production toward military output. Governments rationed consumer goods, controlled prices, and mobilized entire populations. The emergency powers of wartime never fully receded. By 1945, every major Western economy operated as a mixed system blending market mechanisms with state intervention. The New Deal and its equivalents did not solve capitalism's instability. They managed it. The boom-bust cycle continued. Recessions struck in 1953, 1957, 1960, 1969, 1973, 1980, 1990, 2001, 2008, and 2020. Each crisis demanded fresh intervention. Each intervention further hybridized the system. Pure capitalism proved incapable of surviving its own success. The machinery of extraction generated inequality and instability, so severe political systems intervened to correct them. The correction created hybrids. The Cold War would test which hybrid performed better. For 45 years, the world divided into two camps, and the Western Bloc followed market-based hybrids with varying degrees of state intervention. The Eastern Bloc followed centrally planned economies with varying degrees of market concession. Both sides claimed their system would bury the other. The Madison Project database allows direct comparison of economic outcomes across this period. In 1950, American GDP per capita stood at $11,000 in inflation-adjusted dollars. By 1990, it had risen to $23,000. The gap widened rather than narrowed. The Soviet Union ran as fast as it could and fell further behind. Eastern Europe showed similar patterns. Immediately after World War II, socialist economies grew rapidly through heavy industrialization. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and East Germany closed the gap with their Western neighbors during the 1950s. Steel mills rose, coal mines expanded, tractor factories hummed. Then growth stagnated. The easy gains of heavy industrialization exhausted themselves. Consumer economies required different capabilities: flexibility, innovation, response to changing preferences. The command system delivered none of these. By 1989, West Germany produced 3 times the per capita output of East Germany, despite sharing the same language, culture, and pre-war economic base. The Berlin Wall held back not armies, but shoppers. When it fell, East Germans flooded west to buy bananas and blue jeans their system could not provide. World Bank development indicators from this period complicate the simple narrative of capitalist victory. Socialist economies achieved remarkable results in basic welfare metrics. Literacy rates approached 100% across the Eastern Bloc. Infant mortality fell dramatically. Healthcare access expanded to entire populations. Cuba achieved life expectancy matching the United States, despite per capita income 1/10 as large. The socialist machine delivered floors, but not ceilings. Everyone received education, healthcare, and basic housing. Nobody starved after the initial industrialization famines. But consumer abundance never arrived. Technological innovation stagnated outside military applications. Citizens could not choose between competing products because competing products did not exist. The capitalist machine delivered ceilings, but not floors. Top earners accumulated enormous wealth. Innovation accelerated across every sector. Consumer choice expanded endlessly. New products appeared constantly, but significant populations fell through gaps in the market. Homelessness, medical bankruptcy, and chronic poverty persisted in the wealthiest capitalist nations. OECD economic surveys from the 1960s through 1990s document how Western hybrids evolved during this period. Tax revenue as a percentage of GDP rose from 25% in 1960 to 35-50% by 1990 across developed capitalist nations. Welfare states expanded. Public education became universal. Healthcare systems grew more comprehensive in every Western nation except the United States. The most successful Western economies were not the most purely capitalist. The Nordic nations charged the highest tax burdens in the developed world. They also ranked consistently among the wealthiest, healthiest, and happiest societies. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland combined generous social programs with free trade, property rights, and entrepreneurial freedom. Their citizens paid half their income in taxes. They received universal health care, free university education, generous parental leave, and substantial retirement benefits. They also operated some of the most open and competitive markets on Earth. This posed a challenge to both ideological camps. The Nordics proved high taxes and extensive welfare did not prevent prosperity. They also proved private ownership, and market pricing remained essential to innovation and growth. They were neither capitalist nor socialist. They were hybrid optimized for both growth and security. The Cold War ended not with a decisive battle, but with economic exhaustion. Soviet consumers wanted blue jeans and Coca-Cola. They wanted automobiles without 10-year waiting lists. They wanted to travel abroad and see how other nations lived. When Gorbachev opened the information flow, the Soviet system lost its remaining legitimacy. The Eastern Bloc collapsed between 1989 and 1991. Communist parties fell from power. Planned economies rushed toward marketization. The experiment ended. But the conclusion most observers drew missed the point. Capitalism did not defeat socialism. Market hybrids defeated command hybrids. The winning systems combined private ownership with state regulation, market prices with social insurance, individual freedom with collective provision. China understood this before anyone else. In December 1978, Deng Xiaoping addressed the Chinese Communist Party and announced a change of direction. China would open to foreign investment. Farmers would keep surplus production. Private businesses would be permitted alongside state enterprises. The Communist Party would retain political control while embracing market mechanisms. Deng called this socialism with Chinese characteristics. Western economists called it state capitalism. The label mattered less than the results. The World Bank documented 800 million Chinese citizens moving above the poverty line between 1978 and 2018. Average annual growth exceeded 10% for 30 years. China proved the hybrid model worked at massive scale. Markets generated growth. State direction channeled investment toward infrastructure and strategic industries. The Communist Party maintained control over banking, telecommunications, and energy while permitting private wealth accumulation in consumer sectors. The Chinese model also revealed hybrid vulnerabilities. State-directed investment produced remarkable infrastructure, but also spectacular misallocation. Kenneth Rogoff and Yuanqing Yang documented in 2020 researched the real estate sector growing to represent 30% of Chinese GDP. Ghost cities rose across the country. When Evergrande accumulated $300 billion in debt and threatened default in 2021, the scale of command economy misallocation became visible. The invisible hand of the market would never have directed so much capital toward apartments nobody occupied. The visible hand of the state pushed investment where growth statistics looked good rather than where value existed. Demographic collapse now tests whether state capitalism works long term. United Nations Population Division data show China's working-age population declining for the first time in modern history. The one-child policy implemented from 1979 to 2015 was a command decision no market would make. It created a demographic crater the economy must now cross. Fewer workers will support more retirees. Growth will slow. The hybrid faces stress it was not designed to handle. The American hybrid faces different stresses. The Gini coefficient measuring inequality has risen to 0.49. Highest among developed nations, approaching pre-New Deal levels. The gap between top earners and median workers has widened for 4 decades. Real wages for workers without college degrees have stagnated since 1973, despite massive productivity gains. Economists David Autor, David Dorn, and Gordon Hanson documented in 2020 researched the correlation between economic anxiety in deindustrialized regions and populist voting patterns. The system generates growth but distributes it so unevenly, political instability follows. Workers who lost manufacturing jobs did not find equivalent employment. They found resentment, and they voted accordingly. The 2008 financial crisis revealed American capitalism's continued dependence on state intervention. Banks had accumulated toxic assets through markets operating without adequate regulation. When the housing bubble burst, the financial system faced collapse. The Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from $800 billion to $4.5 trillion. The Treasury injected capital into failing banks. Congress authorized $700 billion in emergency stabilization. This was not market self-correction. The 2020 pandemic repeated the pattern at larger scale. The Fed balance sheet expanded to $8 trillion. Congress passed trillions in emergency spending. Loans went to businesses. Without intervention, the system would have collapsed into depression. Every major capitalist economy required massive state intervention to survive until 2008 and 2020. The evidence is documented in central bank balance sheets and treasury records. The invisible hand failed. European hybrids chart a middle path. The Scandinavian model combines the world's highest tax burdens with the world's highest economic freedom rankings. Citizens pay 45–55% of GDP in taxes. They receive universal health care, free university education, generous parental leave, and substantial retirement benefits. They also operate some of the most open and competitive markets on Earth. The Nordic nations prove a functional hybrid need not choose between growth and security. They achieve both. They tax heavily and spend wisely. They regulate carefully and trade freely. They protect workers and reward entrepreneurs. The European Union now experiments with state-guided market transformation. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism adopted in 2023 uses trade policy to force decarbonization. Importers will pay fees reflecting the carbon content of their goods. This is neither pure market nor pure planning. It is a hybrid approach using state power to shape market incentives toward collective goals. Every major economy today operates as a hybrid. The United States combines markets with $6 trillion in annual federal spending. China combines Communist Party control with billionaire entrepreneurs. Europe combines social democracy with integrated markets. The specific mixtures vary. The hybrid structure does not. The 20th century experiment produced a clear verdict. Pure capitalism generates instability and inequality, so severe political systems intervene to correct them. Pure socialism eliminates the price mechanisms and incentives needed for complex economies to function. Both ideological purities fail in practice. What works is the middle. Markets for efficiency, states for stability, democratic accountability for legitimacy. The optimal mixture varies by nation, culture, and circumstance, but the principle remains constant. Neither market nor state alone produces sustainable prosperity. You live inside this hybrid right now. Your taxes fund roads, schools, and retirement systems. Your purchases flow through market-setting prices. Your votes influence the boundary between public and private provision. The system surrounding you emerged from a century of failures, crashes, famines, and compromises. The capitalism versus socialism debate is over. Neither side won. Both sides broke. And from the wreckage, every surviving society built the same kind of machine, a hybrid engine running on market fuel with state steering. The question for your generation is not which pure system to choose. It is how to optimize the hybrid you inherited, how to capture innovation without generating inequality so extreme it poisons democracy, how to coordinate collective action without suffocating individual freedom. The Nordic nations show high-tax hybrids producing prosperity and satisfaction. The American model shows low-tax hybrids generating innovation alongside inequality and instability. The Chinese example shows state direction achieving rapid development alongside political repression and misallocation risk. Study the evidence, examine the data. The answers you need exist in the historical laboratory of the 20th century. 100 years of experiments, billions of lives affected, results now measurable. The experiment taught a lesson no one wanted to learn. Systems work through constant adjustment, not final solutions. The best economies adapt. The worst economies worship their own theories until reality destroys them. Your economic system will change in your lifetime. Crises will force adaptations. New technologies will create new questions no existing framework addresses. When those moments arrive, remember this history. Remember the factory children of Manchester. Remember the bank runs of 1933 and the bailouts of 2008. Remember hybrid systems survive because they bend rather than break.